Loneliness does not knock before it enters a man's life. It slips in quiet and settles deep, like dust on a shelf no one touches anymore. And sometimes, the cure for it does not look like comfort. Sometimes, it arrives looking like trouble at the worst possible time. That is how it happened on a cold spring morning in Montana. The wagon came just after sunrise, rolling slow up a road most folks had forgotten. Dust lifted behind it in a thin gray cloud. Silas Dawson stood on his porch with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand and watched it come. 3 months. That was how long it had been since he mailed the letter. 3 months since he let whiskey and loneliness speak for him. He had told himself no woman would answer. No woman would come all this way to a broken ranch owned by a man who had not smiled in 10 years. But someone had. The buckboard stopped at his gate. The driver climbed down and helped a woman to the ground. She wore a calico dress faded from too many washings. A carpet bag was pressed tight against her chest like armor. The wind tugged at her bonnet strings as she looked up at the house. Then at him. "Mr. Dawson?" Silas did not move. His body felt locked in place. The driver was already turning the horses around. The wagon would not wait. Clara Whitfield stepped forward alone. The house smelled like dust and old sorrow. Clara felt it the moment she crossed the threshold. The air had not known sunlight in years. Cobwebs clung to the corners of the windows. A cast-iron stove sat cold and black. A table held one single chair, and beside the dead hearth, on a hook, hung a woman's wool shawl, the color of dried lavender. Silas stood by the door with his arms folded tight. "I shouldn't have sent that letter," he said, voice rough from disuse. "It was a mistake." Clara set her bag down gently. "I understand. I ain't fit for company. Ain't been for 10 years. I can't marry nobody. Not anymore." He did not look at her when he said it. Clara had heard those words before, in Missouri, in Kansas City, from men who wrote hopeful letters and changed their minds when she arrived. She swallowed the sting. "I've been told I ain't wanted before," she said softly. "More times than I can count." Something flickered across Silas's face. Gone as fast as it came. "You can stay the night," he muttered. "Come morning, I'll take you back to town." "And then what?" she asked quietly. He had no answer. Her room was narrow and bare. The window glass was cracked down the middle. Wind slipped through and carried the smell of pine and rain. Clara unpacked slowly. Her hairbrush, a photograph of her mother, her Bible. She set each thing down like she was placing pieces of herself in foreign soil. That night she cooked beans, cornbread, salt pork. The smell filled the house with warmth it had not known in years. Silas ate without speaking. She stood while she ate because there was only one chair. After supper, he walked out to the porch without a word. The wind cut through her room that night. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Sleep did not come easy. When she woke at dawn, something had changed. The crack in her window was gone. Fresh boards had been nailed tight over the broken glass. Sawdust lay scattered on the floor beneath it. He had fixed it before sunrise. She stepped into the main room. On the table beside her Bible lay a pair of burlap work gloves. New, stiff, waiting. Clara found the garden that afternoon behind a stand of juniper trees. It had once been tended with care. Now it was wild with weeds and thorns. At its center stood a wooden marker. For Elizabeth, who loved this garden. Silas's wife. Clara knelt and began pulling weeds. She worked until her knees ached and her hands burned. She cleared a small circle around the marker. It was not much, but it was life returning to soil that had been left to die. Silas watched from the barn door. He did not speak. That evening, over stew and lamplight, he said her name for the first time. "She planted them the year we married," he said of the roses. "The baby took her when it came. 10 years this winter." The silence that followed was heavy but different. Not empty, just full. The next morning, Clara returned to the garden. By noon, her palms were raw. Silas left a canteen on the stone border and walked away without a word. It was not much, but it was something. 2 weeks passed. The curtains appeared next. White fabric cut from flour sacks, hemmed neat and even. Clara had stitched them by hand. The house looked less like a tomb and more like a place where someone lived. Silas stood outside staring at them before stepping in. He smelled bread baking, heard her humming low at the counter. His chest tightened. For 10 years, he had kept the house frozen in time. The shawl still hung, the rooms still bare, the silence thick. And now this woman with a carpet bag and steady hands was bringing it back to life. That night, he held a whiskey bottle on the porch and did not open it. He looked instead at the glow from the window where Clara moved inside. For the first time in 10 years, his house felt warm. But warmth can be dangerous to a man who believes he deserves the cold. And the next morning, a fine black buggy rolled up the road toward the cabin. Silas saw it from the barn, and Clara saw it from the porch. The richest man in the territory had come calling. The buggy was polished black, the kind that did not belong on a dirt road like this one. Its brass fittings shone in the morning light. 2 strong bay horses stood still as statues, their coats brushed until they gleamed. Clara stood on the porch with a dish towel in her hands and felt her stomach tighten. She knew who it was before he even stepped down. Harding. He removed his hat and climbed the porch steps like a man who had never been refused anything in his life. "Miss Whitfield," he said smoothly, "I hope I ain't intruding." "Mr. Dawson's in the barn," Clara replied. "I didn't come to see Mr. Dawson." The words settled between them. Harding moved closer, just enough to feel like pressure. His coat was fine wool. His boots shined. He smelled like soap that cost more than most men made in a week. "A woman like you shouldn't be living in a place like this," he said, "scrubbing floors for a man who won't even put a ring on your finger." Clara's grip tightened on the towel. "I'm doing just fine." "Are you?" His eyes swept the porch, the patched boards, the simple curtains. "You deserve better than waiting for a man who can't look at you." The truth of it stung more than she wanted to admit. 3 weeks she had been here. 3 weeks of cooking and cleaning and tending a garden that belonged to another woman. 3 weeks of silence across a dinner table. Harding's voice softened. "I can give you a real home. A house with glass windows and proper furniture. You won't have to wonder where you stand." Clara swallowed. "And what would I be to you?" she asked quietly. "My wife," he said without hesitation. "I bury my dead, and I move forward. That's how life works." The words felt cold. From the barn, Silas watched. He saw Harding stand too close, saw Clara's shoulders curve inward, saw the way she held herself small. He did not step in. Harding tipped his hat. "I'll be back Sunday for your answer." Then he was gone, wheels rolling away in a cloud of dust. Clara went inside and closed the door. She slid down against it and let the towel fall from her hands. Silas came in later, boots heavy on the floor. He did not ask what Harding said. He did not need to. That night he handed her an envelope. "You deserve better than what I can give," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Take it. Go wherever you want." $43. Every dollar he had saved. Clara stared at it long after he stepped outside. The next morning she woke before dawn and began packing. She folded her spare dress, wrapped her mother's photograph, slipped her Bible into the bag. The envelope lay beside it. She should go. That was what sensible women did. Silas had made his choice, or so she thought. Before leaving, she walked outside. The roses were blooming now. Red, pink, pale yellow. Alive because she had refused to let them die. She stepped past the garden and followed the narrow path she had never taken before. There, beyond the roses, stood a small iron fence. Inside it were 2 headstones. Elizabeth Ann Dawson, beloved wife. Beside it, a smaller stone with a carved lamb. Clara's breath caught. At the base of the larger stone were 2 mason jars, one filled with wildflowers, the other filled with roses. Freshly cut roses, from the garden she had brought back to life. He had not replaced his wife. He had placed her beside. Clara knelt in the damp grass and touched one of the petals. Dew clung to her fingertips. He was not pushing her away because he did not care. He was pushing her away because he did. Caring meant losing, and he had already buried the woman he loved once. Clara sat there a long time, the morning sun warming her back. When she returned to the house, she set the envelope back on the table. Unopened. She waited on the porch. Silas rode up an hour later and pulled his horse to a stop when he saw her sitting there. He had expected the house to be empty, expected the curtains gone, expected silence. Instead, she stood. "I found the jars," Clara said, "at her grave." Silas's shoulders stiffened. "I didn't mean nothing by it," he muttered. "It meant everything." She stepped closer. "You fixed my window before dawn. You built a shelf for my Bible. You stood up for me in that store. You left gloves so I wouldn't tear my hands. And you bring roses to your wife's grave from my garden." His jaw tightened. "That don't make me fit to be your husband." "No," she said softly. "It makes you a man who's scared." He closed his eyes. "I buried my wife in that ground," he said. "I buried my son. I held her hand while she died. I ain't strong enough to do that again." The truth broke in his voice. Clara did not step back. "My daddy died when I was 15, she said. "My mama worked herself into the grave. Every man I ever trusted walked away. Don't tell me I don't know what losing feels like." The wind stirred between them. "We're both scared," she said. "The question is whether we let fear decide." Silas looked at her the way a man looks at something he has wanted for a long time, but never believed he could keep. "I started wanting you to stay," he confessed, "and that scared me worse than anything." Clara's hand rested on the gate between them. "Then say it," she whispered. "Say what you want." He swallowed hard. "I want you," he said. The words were rough, but they were honest. Silence followed, not empty, just full of everything unsaid. Harding would be back Sunday. A choice would have to be made. Sunday came bright and clear. The sky stretched wide and blue over the Montana hills, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen. Clara stood at the kitchen table that morning, smoothing her dress with steady hands. She had not packed her carpet bag again. The envelope with $43 sat untouched on the shelf Silas had built for her Bible. Silas moved outside before sunrise. He split wood that did not need splitting, checked fences that did not need checking, anything to keep his hands busy. He knew Harding would come, and this time he would not stand in the shadows. Just before noon, The black buggy rolled up the road again. The brass fittings caught the sun. The horses stepped proud and tall. Clara walked out onto the porch. Silas came from the barn and stopped beside her. Harding climbed down slow, confident as ever. He looked from Clara to Silas and gave a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I trust you've given my offer proper thought." "I have," Clara answered. Harding folded his gloves in his hands. "And?" Silas felt his heart pound so hard it hurt. He did not speak. This was her choice. Clara stepped down from the porch. She stood in the yard between both men, sunlight catching in her hair. "I appreciate the offer," she said calmly, "but I won't be accepting." Harding's smile thinned. "You're choosing this?" He gestured toward the cabin, the barn, the simple land. "I'm choosing him," Clara replied. The words were clear. Strong. Harding's gaze shifted to Silas. "You can't give her what I can." Silas finally stepped forward. His voice was steady now. "You're right," he said. "I can't give her your money, or your land, but I can give her my word." Harding let out a short laugh. "And what is that worth?" Silas did not look away. "It's worth everything I got." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind moved through the grass. A horse stamped. Harding studied Clara again, as if waiting for doubt to show on her face. It did not. Finally, he tipped his hat. "You'll regret it," he said quietly. "Maybe," Clara answered. "But it'll be my regret." Harding climbed back into his buggy. The wheels turned. Dust rose. And then he was gone for good. Silas let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Clara turned to him. "Well," she said softly, "that's settled." He looked at her like a man seeing sunrise after a long winter. "You sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." They stood there in the yard, the space between them smaller than it had ever been. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope. "I don't want you staying because you feel stuck," he said. "If you're here, it's because you want to be." Clara took the envelope from his hand. Then she tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping was sharp in the quiet air. She let the pieces fall to the dirt. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I'm staying because this is where I choose to be." Something in Silas broke open then. 10 years of silence, 10 years of grief, 10 years of holding his heart so tight it had almost stopped beating. He stepped forward and took her face gently in his hands. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to love again without being scared every minute." Clara smiled through tears. "Then we'll be scared together." That was all he needed. He kissed her slow and careful, like she was something fragile and precious. Not desperate, not rushed, just honest. When he pulled back, there was something on his face she had never seen before. A smile. Small, uneven, but real. "You just did something no one's managed in 10 years, he said quietly. "What's that?" "You made me smile." Clara laughed softly, and the sound filled the yard like music. They did not rush to the church that day. There was no grand celebration, no crowd, no fine dress. A week later, they stood before the small white chapel in town, with only the preacher and 2 witnesses. Silas placed a simple gold band on her finger. His hands trembled, but he did not pull away. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Silas looked at Clara like he still could not believe she had chosen him. Life did not turn perfect overnight. There were still quiet evenings. Still moments when grief passed over his face like a shadow. Clara never tried to erase Elizabeth. She planted new roses beside the old ones. She kept the wildflowers in jars by the grave. And every Sunday, they walked there together, not to live in the past, but to honor it. The house changed slowly. Another chair was added to the table. Laughter found its way into the kitchen. The whiskey bottle disappeared for good. And sometimes, when Silas thought no one was looking, he would stand in the doorway and watch Clara moving through the house with flour on her hands or dirt on her skirt. And he would smile, not because the pain was gone, but because he had chosen something stronger than fear. Years later, when folks in town spoke about them, they did not talk about Harding's wealth or the size of his ranch. They talked about the way Silas Dawson looked at his wife, like she was the only woman in the world who had ever been able to bring light back into a dark room. And maybe that was the most beautiful kind of love. Not loud, not perfect, but brave enough to begin again after 10 long years. The kind that makes a broken man smile.